Yeah, we're live, and Coyotes rule. So, what's gotten into Richard? What happened to all the junkyard stuff? What happened to the Coyote costing $1 million just to get from a junkyard? And then, hey, Richard, have you ever looked at the cost of cams for Coyotes? Yes, I have. I've done Coyote testing way back in 2010 and 2011. In fact, I think we started doing the testing even before probably right as the 11 Coyotes were introduced or something. Um, and no, I haven't lost my mind. Well, the jury's still out on that. But my question is, and the reason that I'm asking this question is because I'm working on a video right now comparing the 5-liter Ford, which I have a 1988 5-liter LX Mustang, which I love, and I have a soft spot in my heart for those cars and particularly for that engine because I've done so much with it. It was actually the very first motor I ever ran on the engine dyno at West Tech Performance. And that's a whole funny story because I brought it to the dyno. It was completely disassembled. It was basically just a short block. And I showed up at the dyno like at, I don't know, 7:30 or 8 o'clock or whatever, and showed up with it sitting on I think it was in the passenger side. I took the seat out of this little Honda I was driving and it had all this short block and all the parts there and showed up and said, okay, I'm ready to dyno test. They're like, no, you're not ready to dyno test. You're ready to assemble a motor because that's not the same thing as dyno testing. So, and it just went from there. But that was the very first motor that I did. It was the one out of my 88 Mustang, and we ended up notching the pistons and running a million tests with it. And that became the impetus for the book that I did on 5-liter performance. And that's out there available, from Amazon and all that stuff. As long as it's still in print. It's been a while since I did that. And that's when the one that actually got me the call from David Vizard said, hey, Richard, you're a real dyno guy. Thank you very much, which was awesome. And then I just, was after my very first test of dyno testing, I'm like, wow, this answers no questions for me. It did answer some, but it gives me like a million more questions. And that's what happens when you run a test. You're like, okay, we did this. Okay, but what if we did this? And what if we did this? And what if we did this? So I'm going off on a 5-liter tangent because I like them very much. And like I said, did, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and maybe into the next decimal point up, lots and lots of testing with that. But then I'm doing a video today on basically to talk about how far we've come from that 5-liter to the Coyote. And in looking at, as a comparison and looking at where the 5-liter starts at, and then where it can end up at with making the right kinds of things. You would put heads, cam, and intake manifold on it and headers and whatever, and the things that you choose for a 5-liter. Once you start adding up the heads, cam, and intake manifold, and then the power that it makes, and comparing that to basically a bone stock Coyote, we have come a long way. One of those 5-liters is actually not like the other one. One of them is obviously head and shoulders above those. And somebody was asking me the other night when in one of the live feeds, they were saying, well, would you think about Coyote swapping your Mustang? And my answer was immediately no. But now that I'm looking at it a little differently, that maybe that could be an option. I don't know how well they fit in a Fox chassis. The thing is really wide. And that's one thing that the West Tech, especially Brule, always says when we have one of those. He says, man, that thing is like a camera motor. For being a 5-liter, it's like gigantic, especially on the top. Yeah, it's got top. But there's no denying that they do make a lot of power. And we were very impressed because when we ran that Coyote, when I was originally doing the testing with it, we ran all kinds of things. We ran ported heads and 2 sets of camshafts, 3 sets of camshafts in it, a variety of different intake manifolds, the Boss manifold and the stock manifold. The Cobra jets and those things weren't even out. They maybe were not even thought of when we did that, but they weren't even out yet. So we tested what intake manifolds we had available, bigger throttle bodies, headers, blowers, and turbos and nitrous and all kinds of stuff. And then I remember after we did the ported heads, which did pick up power, and I think the cams too, with the factory style manifold, which would be even better probably like with a late model 18 or 19 manifold. But I brought Brule over and said, I want you to look at this. Look at this. Look at this BMEP number on this motor. He's like, that can't be right. I'm like, I know it was 221, I think, which is a so what that means is like the specific torque output for this motor was phenomenal. It was like what you would see from a really, really high compression, like full race style motor. And we were just running this thing on pump gas. So it was really impressive. It doesn't make the torque number that these obviously bigger motors do, and motors that are 15-to-1 compression and have altered valve angles and all these things. But relative to its displacement, the torque output was really, really impressive. And because of variable cam timing and 4-valve wizardry and stuff, and the torque curve was pretty broad too. So it was impressive given its displacement. It was, it doesn't, you'd have to compare it to a 6-liter and stuff to see what displacement does in terms of torque production. But it was really, really impressive. And so after thinking about this differently now, comparing a 5-liter and then how much money you'd have to spend on that 5-liter to make it do what this was a Gen 1 Coyote. This is the first one that came out. So to just a Gen 1 Coyote, what you'd have to do to that motor to have it make that power, it'd be really expensive. I mean, you'd have to spend a lot of money to get it to get that 5-liter to do that. And that's what we're kind of talking about tonight. And then just putting the Coyote in. And I know that with the Coyote, if you, like, buying a quartet of cams is not cheap date. Everything seems to be $1,000+ for the Coyote. The nice thing though is they're starting off with fairly good power right off the bat, which we found out when we ran this crate motor that I had, and then we ran it with headers and started doing all the things to it. And obviously tuning was a critical issue for anything that has variable cam timing. We used the controls pack from Ford Racing, and we had to set up the drive-by-wire throttle body and the variable cam and stuff, and we had to have a guy that knows what he's doing, tune the combination. But once we got that, it responded with pretty impressive power gains. And the thing that I would be worried about putting it in my Mustang is I'm a really big fan of cable operated throttle bodies. I don't want to step on the throttle and have the computer tell me, no, that's really not what you want to do. If it wasn't what I wanted to do, I wouldn't be doing that. So I'm pretty sure that I want to do that. So I don't want countermeasures to be taken. So if I can get rid of all the countermeasures and have it just do what I'm telling it to do, then I would be happy with it. Otherwise, it would be a little disappointing, which is one of the things that we went through with the Coyote initially when we were doing, and then with the other drive wire things that we've done, like with the Gen 5 LT motor, we went through some of that as well. But admittedly, in that case, we were running an LT1 controller on an L83, and it wasn't supposed to be able to do that. But lucky for me, I have Ish and Eric at Westech that can make it do that, which was kind of cool. We just had to extend some wires and change some things around to make it all work, because some of the sensors were different on the L83 than they were on the LT1. But it all of that worked out. But the Coyote is pretty impressive. And then the latest versions of those are even more so. They make a lot more power, respond very well. Guys are running a tremendous amount of boost on these things, because as we know, if the motor is already pretty efficient, which we got to almost 600 horsepower on this Gen 1 motor with, heads, cam, and the right kind of intake manifold, and obviously RPM, because to make that kind of power, you've got to rev the motor. And we did that. So running a Boss manifold, and again, there are other manifolds now that probably make even more than that. So I think getting to 600, even with that early Gen 1 motor, would not be a problem. Getting there with the latest versions of these motors is not terribly difficult. And if you start with that, I mean, and you add boost to that, an E85 and all of that, you start seeing some fairly big numbers come up. I know that Mahovitz did, working with the guys from is it BAE? No, it's not BAE. Who are the guys that do the big Hemi blocks? They got together and did the modular Ford, the Hemi or the Coyote style billet block, and it's really kind of a work of art. And the reason that he did that is because he uses these earlier on his drag race motor in his 4-valve deal. He wasn't doing Coyote stuff. He was using the texted block and doing the early Cobra stuff, the earlier Cobra stuff. Although I think with Ford GT heads later on, he did B heads for a long time and then maybe he had switched over. I'd have to take a look at that and talk to him about that. I should have. I was on the phone with him the other day, and I should have asked him that to try to figure that out. I know they used the B stuff for a really, really long time, but I thought that after testing the GT heads or the FR5 or not FR500s, the Shelby 500, testing those heads, and I thought that he switched over, but maybe not. But he wasn't using the Coyote, and so they decided for guys that were wanting to make 1 million horsepower with Coyotes that they would do a dedicated block. Not that I would think about doing anything like that because it wouldn't be necessary. If you have 1,000 horsepower in a little Fox body, that's more than enough. So that would be another alternative to putting an LS in it or a Barra or something like that in the Fox Mustang. Although honestly, you know, a turbo 302 or 363 or 351 base motor, which is kind of originally what I was thinking of for it. That's going to have more torque and power and stuff than you can use on the street anyway. So, you know, the thought process continues. But that's the video that I'm working on now, and that should be up tomorrow. And so let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about Coyotes, Cody or FR9? They're making impressive power. There's no doubt about that. My buddy Jimmy has one, and we did a series of things with him to get the car to go into the 10s, which is our guys are doing, you know, pretty commonly now. And you think about that, that's a pretty impressive number. That's a pretty fast car. And to do it with the, you know, the minimal amount of mods that it requires now to do that, they respond really, really well to E85, and his did. And he even put the water meth injection, and then tried changing different stages or different amounts of the methanol that he was injecting and stuff. And the things seem to respond pretty well. So it was impressive doing all of that Coyote stuff, and I'd like to do more of that because I think that they're, you know, anything that you can do, you get to make lots of power. That's always fun. So let's see what you guys got going on tonight. Let's see. I love the Voodoo Coyote. 5.4 Coyote and the new V8 supercars. So that's kind of cool. Anything new on the Omni? The Omni doesn't run yet because I haven't run the motor on the engine dyno. Conventional oils tend to gum the VCT systems up, especially in hot climates. Use synthetic oils. I have a Coyote and love it, and an LS. You have to put a lot of money into to get 800 horsepower, but the Coyote already with its heads and flow plus super strong aluminum block all day long. They do make good power. 800 horsepower is pretty easy with an LS. Also, a turbo LS is not hard to do. And you don't have to change the heads to do that on an LS either. There's no doubt about the LS is a cheap date for power. Yeah, synthetic oil is a good idea and everything. And when I was talking to Calvin about the 4200, we were talking about oil because one of the things he was saying on the variable cam on the 4200 on that Atlas motor is that it was very susceptible to changes in oil temperature. And it threw off the actuation or the consistency of the variable cam. He said if they got a bunch of oil temperature in it, then the variable cam was not operating properly. So I thought that was interesting because I asked him if did it have to do with oil pressure, and he said no, we could actually monitor the oil pressure. He said, but it seemed to be temperature dependent, and I thought that was interesting. Global One Advanced Fully Synthetic Dex NASCAR Oil. What is the Dex? The MMR guys also have a billet block that they use. Oh, we have to get a poll going, right? Okay, so let's do a poll. Let's create a poll. Okay. Can you build 1,000 horsepower Coyote cheaper than a 1,000 horsepower 5-liter? Okay, here we go. Can you build a 1,000 horsepower Coyote? If 1,000 horsepower is your number, can you build a 1,000 horsepower Coyote cheaper than you can build a 1,000 horsepower? And I'm going to add a little something to that. 5-liter or 5.8 liter, a small block Ford, a conventional 5-liter or 5.8 liter small block Ford. Do you think it's cheaper to actually build a 5-liter Coyote at 1,000 horsepower than it is a 302 or 351 Windsor at 1,000 horsepower? So let me know what you guys think. That's going to be our poll for tonight. John, you're saying that the Coyotes fit very well on a Fox body. Nice. I want to see a turbo Cadillac. I did that already. Oh, in the Nova or Fox body, but a Coyote. Coyote's cool, but we all know we'll never catch the Roadrunner. Do you plan to do anything with the Atlas? I'm gonna do the 4200, and then we'll see about the other ones. I would like to do the 4-cylinder and the 5-cylinder version also, as long as it's not too much more work from what we already have. They do make a flat plane crank Coyote. I wouldn't put that in there though. That's for the GT350, right? Yeah, Michael, that's the VCT is sensitive to oil viscosity, which is of course affected by temperature. That's the thing that I was getting at. I thought that the temperature was lowering. Well, okay, if it's lower in viscosity, would we see that in a pressure test though? I think we would, right? If you have a Coyote, you need desert cliffs everywhere, and anvils. Apparently, anvils are very big as well. And the other option for the Coyote is like the truck Coyote. So if a 5-liter truck, which has got to be much more prevalent than the Coyote version. So then can we put Coyote cams in the truck motor and then run that as a Coyote? Is the intake manifold different on the Coyote than it is on the truck? Does anybody know that? I haven't even looked into that because I've never thought of doing that or never planned on doing that. Yeah, the 5-liter is gonna. I don't know that you can do 1,000 horsepower 5-liter stuff with a production late model hydraulic roller block. They're pretty thin wall, and I don't know if they're strong enough to do that. A 351, a production 351 block, I'd have no problem doing that. So you definitely could do it with that, but it's going to take more stuff than the 351. You're definitely going to have decent heads and a camshaft in the 351 to do 1,000 horsepower. But if you make a 400 horsepower or 450 horsepower 351 Windsor, you certainly can then get to 1,000 horsepower with boost. Does that include the price of the motor? It's meaning that you don't have anything. You don't have anything. Which one is a better choice to make 1,000 horsepower with in terms of cost? 351 with hand-ported stock heads and a cam and 2 turbos should make 1,000. I think it probably could, although, man, it's not going to sound very good with those stock heads on it. A Cadillac and a Mustang swap, it goes in there easy. A 410-inch FR9. What do you got? A couple of those that you're selling there, Dan? Is that what you're doing? The GT350 engine is called the Voodoo. Oh, so Racer, you want to do it differently. You want to have a 300 horsepower Windsor with a 700 shot of nitrous. I think I've only ever seen one. I've never seen any Coyotes from the Mustangs. I've seen one 5-liter Coyote based truck motor, but when I went there, somebody was already pulling it out. So that's the only one I've ever seen there at the wrecking yards that I go to. For 1,000 horsepower, it needs to live, and you need to be able to go out and make passes with it. Yeah, the 351 Windsor roller blocks are not hard to find. We see those. We see more of the non-roller versions. I tend to, maybe because guys are grabbing the roller versions, but the roller versions are the better ones. Only because I just want to put a hydraulic roller in and make it be easy. Yeah, I've never been able to find one in the wrecking yard. If you could, it would be the same price as the other motors. They don't, in the wrecking yards that I go to, all of the motors, and they've changed this recently, but all the motors except for the big block Chevy were all the same price. Now they're nickel and diming guys to death, probably because I've done stories on this, for having accessories and all kinds of things on them. Sinister. So the pickup Coyote's 2,500 and the Coyote Mustang is 4,000. That's a big difference. But and if I was going to change the cams anyway, then I would obviously spend less if you're wanting to do Coyote cams. But you might be able to find used Coyote cams out there, I would think. A 351 Windsor block won't split at 1,000 horsepower. We've made more than that. You can do 1,000 horsepower on the Cleveland. I won't find any Clevelands in the wrecking yard. Intake cams are different on the truck motor. Are the exhaust cams the same? The truck intake is taller for torque, similar to the LS. That's what I would think would happen. I mean, normally that's what they do for truck applications. Has anybody ever compared the, I'm sure somebody has to, there's got to be other people doing what I do. Has anybody ever compared the truck manifold to the Coyote manifold, to the Mustang manifold? One good thing about the Coyotes, you don't need cams to make 1,000 horsepower. No, if you have a Coyote from a Mustang, it already makes way more power than you need, especially if you get a late model one. It makes way more power than it needs just to go to 1,000 horsepower. And everybody tells me, oh, unopened Coyotes make 1,000 horsepower easy. I think I would want to put ring gap in it, but maybe not. What about a 340 horse Ford Racing crate motor? Does that have a Sportsman block on it, or does it have a factory block? When building a street 465 or 600 horsepower, you can use factory Coyote rods. So are those stronger than the rods that come on the motor? I mean, 4 or 5 and 600 horsepower stuff, I would just use stock rods in a 4.6 in a 2-valve or a 4-valve. We've run those kinds of power numbers a lot. Will a low mileage Coyote with a big turbo make 1,000 horsepower stock? Yeah, it would do that easily. I mean, when I ran the Coyote, I can tell you, here we go. When I ran the Gen 1 Coyote with headers on it, it made 440, 450. It made 461. So 461 just bone stock, and that's a Gen 1 version with headers on it. If you don't have to add very much boost to get to 1,000 horsepower with that. You need an inside guy at the junkyard. The guys are pretty nice there. They're pretty nice to me. And you can get you can on your app, you can get a thing if something that you're looking for, it will ping you and let you know if something's coming in. But the other guys have that stuff too. How heavy is the Coyote compared to an LS? I would think that the Coyote has to be lighter than than like an iron LS, right? But maybe not less than an aluminum LS. Would you prefer the Coyote as a daily or an LS engine? I don't know. I've driven around in I like the Mustang. I like the Coyote Mustangs. They're nice. They're big and heavy for me. I like smaller cars, but the power is really nice, and I think that they drive really nice. As long as it would do that in in my car, that would be good. Zach, we're happy you're here and that you're listening and jumping in. Cams sell intake only for the first gen Coyote truck engine. Oh, they do? Okay, cool. Coyote weighs in at 444 pounds. I don't know what the price on the Coyote cams are. I can take a look and see. Let's see if we can do this. Their Coyote cams. $187 at Mustang High Performance. That must be something else. $1,889 is what I'm seeing. Yeah, so $1,800 is that's not cheap. A 400M with 351 so Cleveland heads. Yeah, that's a stroker 351 Cleveland. Those work good. So it looks like an aluminum LS is going to be comparable to the Coyote, right? Dark Blaze, Richard, that 2.2 Cavalier I told you about a couple of months ago is now making 545 horsepower and 622 foot-pounds. Does it have like a falling boost curve or something? Is that why it's making more torque than horsepower? Honda J35 pistons and custom rods. What head is on that thing? 545 horsepower. Is that at the tire or is that at 28 pounds? Big numbers yet. Dan, how can an aluminum big block weigh the same as an all aluminum LS? That doesn't seem like it's right. And especially an aluminum LS with a composite intake manifold, I would think that it would weigh less than a big block does. Weren't all 351 Windsors after a certain year roller blocks, whether they had roller cam or not, performance or not? I thought when they went to the hydraulic roller stuff that all the motors were hydraulic roller, that they didn't put flat tappet cams in those blocks, but I'm not an expert on that. Coyote rods are way stronger than stock 4.6 rods, plus it's more stroke. The stroke's not going to change with the rod length, right? Are we talking about two different things? How much horsepower does Kenny Detweiler make on his turbo 5-liter? All of it, right? That's Kenny makes whatever he wants. So Jameson, the only mod you need for the Coyote for 1,000 horsepower with a truck is the billet oil pump gear. Because I would imagine the truck, even with the mild cams, even if that thing only made 400 at the flywheel, that still makes 1,000 horsepower easily reachable with the truck motor with no cams. The fastest flathead in the world runs low 7s, but it only makes 600 horsepower. Oh, it's in a dragster then. That makes sense. Where the Real Street Guys is making 2,000 horsepower with a stock crank, forged pistons and rods and a sleeve block. That makes sense. GT 350 heads. A 400M is heavy, and it has a really tall deck height and really long push rods, which would be the thing that I don't know that I would like it as well as I would like something with a shorter deck height. But you certainly can make decent power with them. I mean, we weren't even trying really, and you know, if you put in a 400-inch motor, if you put good heads in it that flow a lot, and then you put a good intake manifold on there, and that's one of the problems with the 400M is because of the deck height. Intake manifolds, other than intake manifolds with spacers, which you have to do, you can do Cleveland intake manifolds then and run them with spacers, but you have to do that. And then you know, it's just there are lots of camshafts available for them. So a 400-inch motor with good head flow, as we've seen in the Fords and Chevys and everything else, with good head flow in the right camshaft, you can make good power with them. How much boost would you need on a 340 horsepower? You'd need almost 20. You'd need like 28 pounds, I think. Times 3. Yeah, you'd need to run it at 3 bar. I ain't no punks in the house. I got my 1974 CT90 up and running. Needs a battery and fuel. Does it need a seat also? Yeah, really long connecting rods on the 400M. Zach, that's a good question. Are Coyote internals interchangeable like the LS motors? So are the early and late, like Gen 1, 2, and 3 Coyotes, are the cranks and rods and everything interchangeable? Braden, the 5-liter block has a reputation. The 5-liter late model hydraulic roller block has a reputation for braking. The 5.8-liter Windsor block does not. Which heads would you put on the Windsor? If you're going to do it cheaply, I think you could, with enough boost, you could do a good cam in the 5.8. You could do a GT40 heads that you hand ported and then put some kind of carbureted intake manifold on it and do it as a blow through carbureted deal. And I think with a cam and GT40 heads and the right kind of dual plane intake manifold, you should be able to get 400 or more horsepower, I think, out of that combination. And then just blow through with a turbo and then, you know, run as much boost as you need. So how is our, can you build a 1,000 horsepower Coyote cheaper than a 1,000 horsepower 5-liter or 5.8-liter Ford? So either a 302 or a 351 based Ford. Can you build the Coyote cheaper? We're at 57% saying no and 43% saying yes. So still the Coyote is, people are thinking that it's going to be more expensive. Turbo Diesel Dan, beauty about the Coyotes, you can keep them stock. Just add boost and fuel to a Gen 2 or Gen 3 for reliable 850 wheel horsepower or 950 wheel horsepower for special occasions. Isn't every occasion a special occasion with boost? But if it's making that kind of wheel horsepower, that's more than 1,000 horsepower. Anyone ever put hydraulic roller from a newer small block Ford into an older block with a small base circle cam? I've heard some not good stories of cam braking. I don't know about the cam braking. You're going to have a problem with oiling for the lifters, and also it's not set up for the guides for the lifters and stuff. So you really need to use a link bar setup. I think too much money has to go into the 351 to make it live for 1,000 horsepower. We made lots of runs near that when I was doing the Big Bang one, and only broke it because I was being dumb. I remember when you blew up that Coyote at 1,450 horsepower. That must be for somebody else. I haven't done that. So does the Coyote have 4 separate cams in it, 2 in each head? Yes, it does. They have an intake and exhaust cam on each side. That's why they're so expensive, because you've got to change 4 of them. Michael, all the push rods have left the chat. Do the pistons and rods live at 1,000 horsepower in the Coyote? Guys are running them there, but and I would see, for me, engine speed hurts things. And so guys tend to, like with the Coyotes, same thing they want to do with the Hondas and stuff, is they want to rev them out farther. I had guys try, oh, my B16 or my B18 runs at 10,000 RPM. That's great. That's why you keep breaking it. You don't have to run them at that engine speed, and you certainly don't have to do it. That's a nice thing about boost, is you don't have to run a lot of engine speed with boost. 4.6 Cobras are iron block. Stay away from the small base circle cams. So Grant, you think the Boss 302 is the best Coyote ever made? So you want me to put a Godzilla in a 7.3 liter in the Mustang? We need someone to just open up a Coyote and add ring gap. I think if I was getting a Junkyard 5-liter truck motor, I think that I would open it up. I would want to see what the ring gap is and then open it up and prep it and then put it back together. Springer, 406 small block Chevy, TRW flat tops. Will a 208 valve fit the release? Want to buy new heads, but certainly can't try anything to test it until I buy something. You can. What you can do is, if you have heads that you have in there now, you can clay it and use the head that you have. If it has a 202 valve in it, you can see where the mark is, and then you can judge by that if the 208 is going to overhang that. You need to open the Cobra 4 valve block. I did an 03 Cobra with twin turbos on it. We were like 990 something, so and we never opened it up. So I can attest to that's certainly a fact. Would that be achievable with 2 DNA GT4? I don't know what a GT40 is. A GT45? Unity, you have a 462 valve that made 600 horsepower NA. That's a lot. Trick flow heads, that's a good start. 295 CFM. So you've done some work to them. 14-to-1 compression, a carb, and nitrous, and it runs mid-10s, mid-8s. In the mid-8s, that's nice. So how much nitrous are you running on that? Is the oil pump upgrade that people are talking about for the Coyote, is that just necessary for RPM? Our 351 pistons that we use, because I think we used some from Probe, or either Probe or Ross when I did mine, and they were down in the hole on the 400. Karen, yes, the parts are interchangeable. I'm thinking that you're answering the early late question that I asked. Did you put ring gap on the Terminator motor? I didn't. I never even opened it up. We ran about 20 pounds on that one. Coyotes need head studs. I think I would do that anyway. Porsches need head studs. Any hard abuse can break the pump in a Coyote. How does the pump, why is it breaking? Is it cavitating? Is the crank shock loading the gyro rotor pump, or what's happening? Oh, a two-step, so it is. 250, 300 shot, anything more than that, the nitrous backs up in the intake. You can see the nitrous coming out of the top of the carburetor. We've seen that before. Stock head bolts are fine. I don't think that that's the case. Harmonics can break them. That makes sense. Coyote engines sound like BMWs. Expensive cams and fragile oil pumps. Nice. Wow. Shots fired at the BMW. So you want to change your answer now? 1,000 horsepower Coyote, possible with stock heads, and yeah, you can easily do that with the stock heads and cams. In fact, you can do it with a Gen 1 Coyote with stock heads and cam. What's with breaking? I didn't know. Are they breaking cams on the Coyote? I didn't know. Dematech, thank you very much. Let's see what was your question. Oh, the trains need fixing. Okay. Be safe out there, man. What are the oil pumps made of and the Coyotes? I think it's cast iron cottage cheese, I think. The stock oil pump is so brittle if you drop it, it shatters. That's not good. Stock Coyote cams are good for 17, 18 horsepower. Yeah, it's if you just need to look at the power output that the motor's making, what it's starting with, and then you can decide what it can get to. So if we have, and I think that the stock, well, I know that the stock late model, the Gen 2 and Gen 3 stuff, makes more than the Gen 1 that I tested, obviously. So if you're starting out with, let's say you're starting out with 500 horsepower, I mean, you can start doing the math to where you can get to fairly easily. There's no update on the 2.2 because I haven't run it yet. And if I did, we would be talking about that. Is the pull NA? Yeah, it would be 1,000 horsepower NA motors. That'd be hard to do. Chase, that's entirely the wrong attitude to have here. You don't need, nobody needs to chest pound and talk about how great Coyotes are and they're better than everything else, because they're not. There's lots of good motors out there. The Coyote's one of them, and that's why we're talking about that tonight. The one that you like doesn't have to be the best one in the world. That's not the way that the world is. There's lots of good choices out there, and we like to make power with all of them. I own an E46 BMW. Ironically, the aftermarket cams are really expensive, and the oil pumps are known for failing. Does Kelford or one of the expensive guys make cams for the BMWs? Doesn't anybody that makes low-cost cams do that? Are you going to do a 300 build? 2.3 liter valves are a great upgrade. The 300 Ford, is that what you're talking about? I do want to do one of those. Once you get to the 1,300 horsepower mark, you need to sleeve the block. That's what Mahovitz was telling me, that the guys that were running the Coyotes and trying to really turn them up, like he had done with his, obviously, that they're running into block issues. I did not send out the 3,800 heads, and I don't know if I'm going to, actually. The Ford guys don't need me to feel special. That's, the Coyotes obviously work and make lots of power, but so do a lot of other things, and that's the thing. The Chevy Sprint engine is awesome. It makes 70 horsepower, and then getting it to make more than that is great. It doesn't have to be the best thing ever. Neither does a rotary or a BMW or a radial engine or whatever else we're talking about. They can all be good. Yeah, Charles, they're giant on the top side. That's why Brule keeps calling them camera motors. 300 Ford 6, big block Chevy rods, and 2.3 valves. So those are the hot setup. Is the rod a bolt-in thing? Is it the right thickness and right rod journal diameter and all that? An ATI balancer goes a long way on Coyotes. With their OPG crank sprocket is a good upgrade, and secondary chains. Nobody makes cheap cams for the BMW. Schneider does regrinds. Okay, they're usually pretty reasonably priced. Dark Blaze, thank you very much. You missed my comment about the Cavalier engine way back. I saw the one about it making the power, but what was it? Where are we at? Dark Blaze. Come on. I wanted to see the information on that motor, because that sounds really cool. I mean, how often do we see Cavalier motors? And we shouldn't be so cavalier about this. This was a good post. I know. Cavalier puns. I'm scrolling back, and then when I scroll back, I can never find it. I'm not seeing it. You gotta tell me what's going on. Won't the starting cost be more with the Coyote? Haven't seen anybody push the 306 cylinder. I don't know what kind of cylinder head that has. I don't know how much head flow it has. I know that if you go to try to buy an 03 or 04, like a complete 03 or 04 Terminator motor, it's not a cheap date anymore either. Oh, Dark Blaze, here we go. It is the LN2 pushrod 2.2. It's wheel horsepower and torque. From the factory, they made more torque and horsepower. I done it 100% stock, and it made 116 wheel horsepower and 158 foot-pounds. That makes sense from the factory. Does this thing have cams and stuff in it? I'm going to give you a citation. Everybody with the Cavalier puns. Is it worth porting the C-cast heads on a 5.4 or trying to find B or Z cylinder heads for it? All of those heads will respond to porting. Rhombus, you want to see a 3.9 liter Dodge Magnum or a 4.6 North Star? I just want to get through the Magnum that I have. I want to do a 318 Magnum also. Casey, I'm sure Schneider could regrind this. Dad jokes, yes, exactly. Stock regrinds, okay. As far as overall power band, it seemed like the Boss 302 that Richard tested had a wider power band and more torque and horsepower than any Windsor head. I don't think that that's accurate. Elgin might grind you stuff. Richard, have you really fallen off on Fords? I don't know what you're talking about. I like all motors. Tip your waitresses. They need the money for makeup. I want to compare the 318 5.2 liter Magnum to the 360 5.9 liter Magnum, because we all know that the 318, likes to rev and makes more power and yada, yada, yada. 318, best motor ever made. 302 Clevelands are in Australia, and then also we had the Boss version here, but how do regrinds work? Seems like they would make it smaller. They don't make it smaller. They can add usually about 20 degrees of duration. All they do is shrink the base circle down. They haven't shrunken the cam lobe. Well, they have shrunken the cam lobes down, but they've reprofiled them, so they're effectively more duration. It's just that you have to take up the lash now, which would be, I don't know. It depends on how much they have to cut it to make that work. But usually you can add, when Schneider regrinds them, you can change it by 15 or 20 degrees of duration. And sometimes, I don't know, 40 or 50 thousandths lift. Oh, so we need to do horsepower and happy hour again? Yeah, I need to talk to Lisa about that. Charles is in the house. Yeah, that Dan's right. That's the other way that you can do it. You can weld them up and then recut them at a standard base circle, but then you have to make sure that you harden it and stuff. Richard, you're sounding like Steve has been talking to you about the 318. It seems like a lot of the Mopar guys are like that. Oh, the 318, that's the greatest motor ever. Yeah, it just makes less power than a 360 because it's smaller. The topic, if you take a look at the poll that we have, can you build a 1,000 horsepower Coyote cheaper than you can build a 1,000 horsepower 5-liter or 5.8 liter, a 302 or a 351 conventional Windsor? So right now we're at 55% no and 45% yes. So it's still looking like a no on the low buck Coyote. The 318s, yeah. It's like the B16. So I have an interesting B16, and this is why I tell this about the 318 versus the 360, or the 327 or 302 Chevy versus the 350, or any smaller motor versus any bigger motor. The bigger motor can always win because it can make more power because it's bigger. And I went through this real early on in the back in the Honda days with the guys from JG, and I remember going out to lunch with them, and I remember them telling me, "Oh yeah, you can make a lot more power with a B16 than you can with a B18." And I'm like, I know that you guys are the Honda experts and that I'm not. I'm just getting started in this, and I've been dyno testing for a year or two or whatever, and I'm just kind of, getting started in all this turbo stuff. And you guys are out running whatever 11s or 10s or 9s or whatever they were running at the time. This was early on. And I said, so I want you to explain to me how do you, it's all about rod ratio, and RPM. I'm like, well, what stops the B18 from running more engine speed? What would stop that from making more power? Oh yeah, you just don't understand. I'm like, no, I probably don't understand, because nobody I know is picking a B8 other than Lisa Kubo at the time. Nobody is picking a B16 over the bigger motor, especially to spool a bigger turbo and then make more power because it's bigger. I mean, they wouldn't tell me what it was because they didn't know. Oh yeah, and the 340 because at least the 340 I understand, because that's not that much smaller than a 360, and then with rare exception, the 340 was the performance version that they offered. So if you wanted a hot Mopar back in the day, it was a 340 and not a 318. And then the 360 they had in that little Red Express or whatever, the truck, that was a kind of a performance version, but not like it was in the heyday of the muscle car era, where you had high compression and high winding, lots of camshaft and stuff. And so the 340, I can understand why they're saying that made more power. At least I get that. But saying that a 318, the 318 is better than a 360, like a modern version, like a Magnum one, or even a earlier carbureted version, like the LA versions of a 360 and a 318. If somebody gave me the choice and we were putting them in the same car, the 360 is going to, with similar parts on it, is just going to be faster than a 318 will. All B16s came with the good heads. Most B18s came with bad heads. Combine the good head with the B20. That's a B20. Yeah, I'm familiar with all of the B series stuff, and no GSR or Type R ever came with a bad head. Both of those were good heads, and both the Type R B18, even more than the Type R B16, the B16B. The bigger motors made more power, and they made a lot more average power, which is the thing that makes them win. Do Coyotes split the block? I know that the racers that are making lots of power have issues with block strength because they're getting up to the point where they have block strength issues. The 340 had a lot going for it. It had similar heads that they use in the 360s. It had the J and X heads, so they were comparable. It had the big valves in it. It had more compression. It had the best camshaft. It had the most aggressive camshaft, especially the stick 340 version. It had a good intake manifold and carburetor on it. I mean, good for factory stuff. You can buy a 351 Windsor for $100, and you can find a lot better. $2,000. You can spend a lot less on cylinder heads for a 351. A snafu, yes. H series are also good. I did most of my work on B series back on the Honda days, though. What's the skinny on board stroke ratio? For what we're talking about, it's usually not an issue. It doesn't change anything. What head flow would you need for an NA 351 Windsor at 1,000 horsepower? That's not critical. You can make 1,000 horsepower with like a GT40 head. If the NA motor makes 400 horsepower, it will make 1,000 horsepower, and you can do it with less. It just takes more boost to get there. Let's see. Do a 2J Big Bang. It would have to be not a Supra turbo motor. It'd have to be one of the lesser expensive ones. Does anybody know what the flow numbers are on the Coyote? I can't remember. I'd have to look up our Gen 1 deal. I want to say that when we ported it, they picked up like 30 or 35 CFM. You're not going to get a Windsor to do 1,000 horsepower NA. That'd be a lot. The world's fastest four-cylinder is a GM Ecotec. I know that they were making crazy power back in the Sport Compact days, and I don't know if they're still doing that. I remember the Roush guys got involved. I remember seeing one of those, and they were making a lot of power. NA2Js are pick apart specials. I have seen those in the Lexuses. Have you seen good results from metal surface like WPC? I haven't tested that. Stock Coyote heads are around $295. $2.5 JZ for the money. A 2JZ is not actually a very good cylinder head. I mean, not in terms of flow. I was talking to Calvin about that, and I'm sure the 4200 head flows a lot more than a 2J does. Wheelbase. 20 years ago, we built the 360 LA with a set of mildly ported Edelbrock heads. They need a little bit of porting help. They don't work a whole bunch better than a stock head when we tested them. 238 Hughes cam, dual plane, made 449, 453 foot-pounds. Mopar small blocks just need good heads. They do. I remember Dulcich has ported more than a few, and they did need good heads. 4-liter Jeep testing, that's another 6-cylinder that I'd like to do. I wouldn't be surprised if an RB has a better flowing head than a 2J. I've never flowed the RB heads, and I have the RB25, and so we'll do some work to that, I'm sure. Be Easy, I have an 08 Silverado, 5.3 liter aluminum block. Those are good. Mazda L series. That's like the, isn't that the Duratec motor? I've seen the V8 K series deal. I've talked to him. Yeah, the 2J is known mostly for its block strength. In fact, most of the ones that make lots of power, they're not doing it with stock bottom ends, because somebody was asking me to do a big bang one like with a stock bottom end. I honestly don't think a 2J is going to do very well. I mean, it's going to do well, but it's not going to like go to 2,000 horsepower, because I don't think that the stock bottom end is really that strong. Most of the guys that are making lots of power are saying, okay, I have a stock block, but all the other things are not stock. A ported Coyote head does flow over 300 CFM. I wonder, does a Barra head flow more than a 2J? Subaru builders are convinced about long rods. That's good. Amos, hey Richard, 8.1 liter Gen 7 is waiting for you. Let's see, I'm even porting an intake. Kind of went wild. This is, don't spend too much time on it, man. We just want to test it and see if it's going to work. Subaru builders are convinced that long rod engines are somehow incredible game changers. Any comments on like this? So they think that they're picking up power just by changing the rod length. I'd really like to see that back-to-back test. If they're not changing anything else, like the displacement or compression or cam timing or boost or anything else, I'd like to see what that does. I would suspect that would be difficult to measure. I haven't done a VH45DE. I haven't ever done one of those. All right, Woodies. We'll see you later, man. Breaking the hearts of Subaru owners since 1998. Yeah, the Bear is a 4-liter engine. It's stock one's definitely going to make more power than a. I don't know that I've ever seen a naturally aspirated 2J on the dyno. I think it would be underwhelming. Yeah, so they'll say that the long ride guys will say reliability, smoothness of operation, or harmonics. Because everybody measures harmonics. That's like saying it hits the converter harder, and we know what that is. An NA2J makes about 180 horsepower. Have you seen them run? Have you seen it when somebody actually run a low compression turbo 2J like that they would use in the Supra, like that NA motor? You want to see more 4.3 liter V6 testing? I want to see 4.3 liter V8 testing. Well, actually, it would be a 5 liter because I want to make the 302. The head on the Cavalier is ported and polished, has oversized valves, titanium springs. Wow. Modded rocker arms. Does it have an air-to-water intercooler on it? Are you running ice water and stuff on it? If you're going to build 1,000 horsepower Windsor because you use Cleveland heads, yeah, you could use any head that you want on there. Is there any other common older V6? The 3100s and 3400s and the 2.8 liter stuff, you could test all of that. How much power is a stock Coyote good for? I don't know. Can somebody answer that? I don't know what the current record is. What's more reliable, an L32 or an aluminum LS? Well, an aluminum LS, they run for hundreds of thousands of miles if you're talking about a stock one, right? The advantages of long rods I've seen are wider power band without any apparent loss in peak power, and also more power from restricted intake ports. So you've actually seen a test where the only thing that they've changed is the rod length, and they showed some kind of power change. The snafu years will be the last question because I got to get going. 4.3 liter V6 versus 4.3 liter V8. The V8 processes more air, right? More power and the same displacement. Maybe, maybe not, because the one advantage that I see that I like to talk about on the V8 version of a 4.3 liter as opposed to a V6 is that on any motor that has more cylinders and the same displacement, the head flow becomes less critical. So effectively, you're having to feed, if you have a limited head flow, you're having to feed a smaller cylinder. So it doesn't take as much airflow because you've spread that out over more cylinders. So if you have limited head flow, which is usually the case with these stock motors, on a V6, to make 200 horsepower, you have to have effectively better cylinder heads on the V6 than you do on the V8, which is probably not the case. They're probably both flowing comparable numbers, I would imagine. So the V8 could potentially make more power if you have two heads that, let's say that both of the heads flow, we'll pick a number. Let's say that both of the ports flow 180 CFM. You can make more horsepower from 180 CFM flowing head because you have more ports flowing that amount. It's much easier for the V8 to do that than the V6. If the V6 head happens to flow more, then obviously all of those bets are out of the window. But the same thing that happens with, V8s and V10s, because now it's spread out over even more cylinders. So you don't have to effectively, even if you have like a V10, Triton V10, and the heads don't flow very well, they effectively flow better than they do on a V8 because you just have more cylinders to divide it on. Okay, that's enough for me. Thank you guys all for showing up. I'm working on the video comparing the Coyote. I need to finish out our poll here and see how we did. So we're looking at 56% say no, that you cannot build a 1,000 horsepower Coyote cheaper than a 1,000 horsepower 302 or 351. So it looks like that people still think that the Coyote is not the good bargain, bang for the buck kind of deal, even at the 1,000 horsepower level, which is interesting. And I would tend to agree with that on this poll, because I think if you wanted to do it as cheap as possible, a 351 Windsor that you can go to the wrecking yard and get cheap, take the stock heads off, throw them in the garbage, get a set of GT40 heads from the 5 liter Explorer and put those on there and just say, yeah, this is what it came with. And then you could do your own little bit of porting, put a camshaft in there, put ring gap in it, spend a little bit of money on head studs and head gaskets, and then put a camshaft in that and springs on the heads, And then with the right turbo or turbos, which are very cheap, you can make really pretty good power with that 351. And I think that ultimately that combination would be cheaper than you could do it on a Coyote. Although the Coyote is ready to go right when you get it from the wrecking yard. I don't know about the ring gap. Probably I would feel better trying to do 1,000 horsepower stuff. Although on a Coyote that's already making 450 or 460 horsepower, it's not going to take very much boost to get you there. And I think that ultimately the 351 Windsor would be in a comparable area. It'd be 400 plus horsepower anyway. And so it's not going to take a lot of power to get there. Like on a Coyote, it's 14 or 15 pounds. And maybe you could do the same thing with a Windsor. So I think from a cost standpoint, the Windsor probably still has the edge, but the Coyote is actually looking like a little bit better deal than I thought after you consider all of the costs that you have to make the power that you need to make out of a Windsor. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow. And boom, hit that end button.